Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Get Your Popcorn podcast. So this week and next week, I'm going to be doing Gone with the Wind. As you guys saw on Monday, I dropped a bonus episode. Sorry, I can hear my heat pump in the background. Hopefully you can pick that up on mic. I dropped a bonus episode on the documentary of the making of Gone with the Wind that was released for the 50th anniversary episode. So that talks a lot about the behind the scenes stuff. So there won't be as much of that as there normally is just included because I did a bunch of that in, I think that's 35 minutes worth of like just behind the scenes stuff. So I'll drop in a little bit, but not as much about the casting process and all of that, just because I've already covered it. So if you're looking for that, go and tune into the bonus episode if you haven't already. So I'm going to start out with a disclaimer. I'm just going to read it off because I wrote it down. As you guys know, I watch the movie, make notes, and then kind of chat while I'm doing that. But this is the disclaimer off the top that will appear appeared actually on the bonus episode. It'll appear on this one and then the following one, because Gone with the Wind is a rather controversial film. Gone with the Wind is a 1939 film based on Margaret Mitchell's 1936 novel of the same name. It is set in the antebellum South in the Reconstruction era. It is told from the point of view of slave owners who long for a civilization that has gone with the wind. It is full of revisionist history and false narratives surrounding the atrocities committed by white slaveholders and the Confederacy. The movie, although far less racist than the book, is still something that cannot be excused. Although not blatantly stated in this film like it does in the book, it does reference the Ku Klux Klan. It is whitewashed and painted as just a political meeting. The white men and women in this film are framed as noble and with higher values, while the black characters are portrayed with harmful stereotypes and false narratives. I want to blatantly say that I in no way share the values that the characters hold. Slavery, the damage done by the 13th Amendment, and the current issues involving police brutality and systemic racism for the black community must be acknowledged and addressed. I want to say explicitly and with my full chest that I support the Black community and their continued efforts for equality. The struggle for the Black community did not end with the Emancipation Declaration or with the Civil Rights Act. There is much more work that is to be done, and it is our responsibility as white people to respect and assist in that fight for equality. I feel this film is important to review and discuss for all the reasons I have listed. We must understand history in order to properly move into the future and ensure it does not repeat itself. Gone with the Wind and films like it must be examined with a critical eye in order to identify propaganda and whitewashing when we see it. I will attempt to handle this subject as best as I can as a white woman from Canada, and I do acknowledge that I am not able to understand the full nuance as it is not my lived experience. And to anybody listening who is bothered by a statement like this or any warnings that appear in films because you find it woke or unnecessary, this isn't the podcast for you. I am committed to my own unlearning and unpacking of systemic racism, and if that bothers you, you are part of the problem. I feel like is sort of a timely film to discuss, given what is currently going on in the United States, and then the rhetoric that is like spreading to Canada that I just think is like disgusting. There is a push here in Canada for traditional values. We see that advertised a lot with like Pierre Poilievre, and I know those of you that are like regular listeners of this podcast, I haven't explicitly said like exactly who I vote for, but it's pretty obvious I don't vote conservative. I don't know if it's necessarily fair for me to push my own personal politics on everybody, but I do feel like discussions of diversity, discussions of being inclusive, about acknowledging the horrors in our country of what was done to Indigenous people, and not going back and like holding these higher values for people like John A. Macdonald. There's a reason we took him off our money. Like, he's not great. I don't like that Pierre Poilievre is saying that we need to go back to the wanting those values and those visions. Very similarly, in the States, and this is where Gone with the Wind takes place in the southern states. It's told by the point of view of the Confederacy, and we're seeing a lot of that coming back with Donald Trump and his removal of Black History Month, his removal of end racism off the football field at the Super Bowl, and his historic quotes and public statements where he is openly super racist. And I feel like it's important to talk about films like Gone with the Wind because when we talk about things like systemic racism, it's not just the public systems that we've set up, it's not just the prison systems and the way that the law works and the way that we're taught in education and schools, because we really do just like kind of brush over a lot of that. And we talk, I think, really well about World War II in particular and the atrocities of the Holocaust. And we had just started to sort of talk about things, here in Canada particularly, but in the States more so. They just sort of started to talk about more about slavery and some of the atrocities, and including Black history, because it isn't a point of view that is often told. We have to remember that history is often told by the winners, and white people have a pattern of kind of downplaying their own atrocity about what was done in order to kind of soften the blow to their own ego and make them kind of feel better about what happened. They talk a lot about in the States, founding fathers and all that stuff, but we don't talk about how, George Washington's false teeth were made from his slaves' teeth and things like that. And that was just starting to become a little more public knowledge and talked about, especially, making its way into my country and sort of learning that. And over the process of me, with the Black Lives Matter movement, trying to do what I can in order to for my own knowledge and making sure that, checking my own personal bias and unpacking some of those things, because even though I don't personally consider myself to be racist, our systems are set up in a way that is oppressive, and it's important that we learn about that, understand that, so that we can start to dismantle that. But there's this big push in the States and then now here in Canada to go back towards these systems, because I think that white people are very uncomfortable with their like loss of power and loss of privilege, and they don't understand that, the word equality, the word diversity, for whatever reason, is quite a scary word for God knows what reason. And they don't realize how much it impacts everybody. And I saw this quote, and it was talking about feminism. And by quote, I mean, I saw TikTok, where all good learning takes place. But it was talking about feminism. But, that a lot of this stuff can apply to like any group of minorities. And it says, feminism is, when a man has his boot on your neck, and a feminist is asking the man to take the boot off the neck, and kind of, but men's advocacy groups are saying, but now my foot has nowhere to rest. Right? And it isn't, and so that's what I think a lot of this is just like people's own fear and fragility, and it's based in these racist systems that people haven't taught themselves that that's what that is, and that there is enough to go around, and we are choosing to not do that. We are choosing to hoard the wealth. We are choosing to keep people oppressed. We are choosing to allow ourselves to benefit from these systems because we've been set up to be the winners. And we think, and by we, I mean like white people, like not me personally, but I think people are really scared to like let go of that and let go of those systems because they're comfortable and they're privileged. And so this is why I do think Gone with the Wind is very important to talk about. And I know there is kind of controversial opinions and divisive opinions about whether or not we should no longer be regarding Gone with the Wind as this like high art, and talking about it because there is such harmful stereotyping of Black people. It was, in the time that it was released, the, Black media, and there's a lot of Black critics about the film and the portrayal and the movie. And it is racist. Like, there is no excusing it. I'm not going to excuse it here. But why I feel that it's important to discuss is I feel like for the white population, we're not good at recognizing propaganda. We're not good at recognizing systemic racism, and media is a part of that. Media sends a message. A lot of times media and art can kind of set the tone, and they can steer people in directions. They're able to, like with movies, you're able to see a story and have it humanized in front of your eye a little bit better than when you read like an article on something. And I think Gone with the Wind in particular is a great example of the rewriting and of history and the propaganda that media has placed since its inception. We look at our first feature-length film, A Birth of a Nation. It was produced by the Ku Klux Klan. So media, from its inception, film, has also contributed to systemic racism. We see this even today with minority films and the Black community and South Asian and the Asian community are severely underrepresented in awards and Oscar nominations, where, often these like completely white cast films, often largely men, are the ones that are celebrated, and a lot of these other films are very much pushed to the side. The portrayal of of these characters by Black actors, they're highly typecast. There's only kind of a couple of roles that people are able to have in these mainstream films. And so that's still something that's happening now. And I think it's important for us to look back at the history of film and why this is happening and how it's a system that's been set up since the beginning. And so I feel like it's important to look at Gone with the Wind and look at how media influences and is also a mirror to culture. And so that's why I feel it's important to talk about Gone with the Wind. And as a person who, this film, I grew up with this film. It was a big part of my family. I read the book really early. I watched the film really early. My parents were really good. They always talked to me about like, this isn't accurate. This is not what happened. They are portraying slave owners as these like good people who kind of like took in the Black people. They were like, they're sort of portrayed as like simpletons that like needed direction and needed the support of white people. My parents were really good from like the time I was like little, first saw the movie, were like, this isn't accurate. This isn't okay. So I always had that context when watching the film or reading the book. However, like as I've grown older and I understand the world better, and I've also done like a lot of my own work in terms of trying to unpack a lot of this stuff, I've noticed that the more I watch this film, every time I review it, there's always more stuff where I'm like, oh my God. Again, I said this in the other book, and when I have read the book again, or I talk to people about this book or this film, the sticking point for me onto why I like this film is because of Scarlett. And yes, she does some horrible stuff. Absolutely. This is, I think, one of the early and only examples early in like in media and filmmaking of a female character that isn't just like slapped around and told what to do. And like Scarlett has her own brain and her own goals, and she's gonna do it. And she looks at the women around her and says, she takes them by her hand and she says, come on, we're not gonna fall down. They're not going to beat us. We're doing this, and I don't care what it takes. I don't care what people think. I am going to be okay, and I'm going to survive. And I think we don't have, as women, a great number of examples in media of strong female characters. Often there are side parts, they play supporting roles. There's only women don't have the greatest roles available in Hollywood, particularly as we get older. And I think that is like the sticking point for me for Gone with the Wind, is why I love it so much. Is when I was a kid, I'd look at Scarlett and think, I want to have that level of strength when I get older. And I want to have that level of like, I don't give a fuck about what other people think. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to do what I need to do to survive. And I think that's the sticking point in Gone with the Wind for me. And it is like the dichotomy in which I watch the film as I think about this horrible racism. And then I think about this like incredible feminist character. And it's a weird mix of like terribly regressive and incredibly ahead of its time. And that's where I struggle with Gone with the Wind. I'm not going to excuse the racism element of the film. I've talked a lot about it. I try to talk a lot about diversity and equity and inclusion. I try to use my platform as best as I can. However, it is a very small platform to talk about racism and to talk about how it's not okay, and to talk about the things in my own country in which I see all the time, and what I see reflected in media. As a woman, I am very attached to my strong characters for women. There isn't a lot. And if there is a strong character that's a woman, often she's portrayed in like kind of a negative light. She's viewed as like a nag or a bitch. That's a thing that like to toss around. Or she's like the sidekick friend, and then of course her friend who is like more adaptable and meeker is always the one that gets the guy. Women in media always have to change in order to get what they want by the end of the movie. And this isn't that. This is a woman who fights the whole film. And that is what I take away from the film on that aspect. And that's why I feel really conflicted on this film. I am not going to excuse the racism. I'm going to talk about it throughout. I talked a lot about it in the making of because of the treatment of the Black actors and Hattie McDaniel particularly. So this is a tough film to talk about. I'm going to attempt to do it with a lot of nuance. It's not going to be perfect. I'm not going to be able to talk about this with the best level of nuance. I'm a white person from Canada. It's not going to be perfect. I am absolutely open to feedback. So if anybody's, I don't know if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify or whatever, but you're welcome to comment and be like, hey, like this is actually, no, it needs to be framed, or like this is a point for like why this film shouldn't be viewed or celebrated. Like I am absolutely open to that. What I'm not open to is anybody that wants to talk about how diversity and inclusion and equity are not important, how I have like a woke rhetoric. I am happy with where I'm at. I am happy with the fact that I want to move forward in a way that is inclusive, and a way that is lifting everyone up, and in a way that, I don't hold on with my clutches to privilege, and that I unpack that, and that I want to lift other members of my community up who don't look like me or come from the same background, because that's what you should do. You should be a good person. So don't comment any of that shit under my stuff. I don't care. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to engage with it, because that's not where you should be as a person. You should want the betterment of everyone around you. You really should. So that being said, I know I tend to rant to the top of these things. I can't help it. My favorite podcaster is Mark Maron, and he does it too. So we're going to get into the film a little bit. So Gone with the Wind is a 1939 film. It is based on the 1936 book written by Margaret Mitchell of the same name. This film is an epic. It is darn near 4 hours long. It is set slightly before the American Civil War, through the American Civil War, and the Reconstruction era. This film had 3 different directors: George Cukor, Victor Fleming, who does get the credit for the film, and Sam Wood. David Selznick produced it with the help of MGM for some funding and distribution. This film was a disaster production. Again, check out the bonus episode for that. This film was nominated for 13 Oscars, winning 10, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress. This film is the highest grossing film of all time adjusted for inflation. In today's money, it made $3.5 billion at the box office. So like I said, I unpack a lot of the kind of racial controversies that happened in that initial one, and I feel like I've done like a significant rant at the top of this episode that lets you know very clearly how I feel about it. So I will weave it a little bit in as I go in, but I've done a lot of work to try and unpack that as best as I can. So this is a really big film, so there's a big cast. I'm splitting this up into 2 parts. Gone with the Wind has the first 2 hours, and there's like a scheduled intermission in the film, and then the second part, it basically, the first part leads up to the end of the Civil War, and then afterwards is Reconstruction. So start off with a bit, this is split, I've got a list done, and Wikipedia actually breaks it down really well. So I'm going to read off of that in terms of how they break it down. So Scarlett is our main character. She's our heroine at the time of the film. In the beginning, she's 16. I think it goes all the way till she's like 30, 32. And she starts on a plantation called Tara. It is owned by her father named Gerald and her mother named Ellen. Gerald is an Irish immigrant, and if you read the book, they don't consider Irish people white. It's the racism in this book knows no bounds. Gerald O'Hara is an older man. He's got this like hair trigger temper. Any stereotype about Irish people you can think of, Gerald's got it. It's made clear in the book, less so in the movie, that he married this woman named Ellen. She's a lot younger than him. She came from a very, considered noble, wealthy French family who had roots in Haiti and then came over to, I believe it's Savannah. And sort of by luck, shortly after a heartbreak that she experienced, she says yes when Gerald proposes. And he adores Ellen. This is like the love of his life. They have 3 daughters: Scarlett, who's played by Vivien Leigh, Evelyn Keyes, who plays Sue Ellen, the middle sister, and Anne Rutherford, who plays Corinne, who's the youngest sister. Then we have the plantation next door. This isn't gone over as much in the movie as it is the book. There's the Tarleton family. They're another Irish immigrant family, although they've been here for a good chunk of years and a couple of generations. They've got 2 twin boys who are sort of Scarlett's beaux, which is guys that she like kind of casually dates. Scarlett's got a lot of these, and their names are Brent and Stewart. 12 Oaks is the plantation that is another neighbor, and that is John Wilkes, who is a widower, is the owner of the plantation. Then he has a daughter, India Wilkes, and then his son, Ashley Wilkes, who is the love interest for Scarlett, who's played by Leslie Howard. Leslie Howard, at the time of this film's casting, was 46 years old, and he's supposed to be playing an 18-year-old. He is way too old for the part and looks it. He's a terrific actor. And so it's kind of a shame. It's right actor, wrong time. In the later half, the second half of the movie, it's not really a big deal because at this time he's supposed to be in his 30s and he's in his 40s, and we see that all the time with male actors even now. So I have a lot less of a problem with it, but in the beginning of the book, it's quite obvious. Vivien Leigh, at the time of the film, who plays Scarlett, is 25. And so you're seeing the two of them next to each other. You're like, oh my God, like there's a 20-year difference. And then we have Olivia de Havilland, who plays Melanie Hamilton, who is from Atlanta, and she's Ashley's cousin. And in this movie and book, like any Southern love story, they are cousins. First cousins. So, yeah, some real Habsburg shit happening here. And then we have Rand Brooks, who plays Charles Hamilton, who becomes Scarlett's first husband. And he is the younger brother of Melanie, again, a cousin of Ashley. We have Rhett Butler, who is played by Clark Gable. He is the sort of visitor to Ashley's estate and one of the barbecues they have, and then he becomes sort of this antagonist / love interest for Scarlett throughout the film. We have a few sub kind of characters later as we get into Atlanta. We have Laura Hope Cruz, who plays Aunt Pitty Pat. She's Melanie and Charles's aunt. We have Uncle Peter, played by Eddie Anderson, who is her kind of coach, caretaker. In the film, he's a much smaller character. In the book, Uncle Peter's a very big character. We have Dr. Mead, who is kind of a central character. He runs the hospital. His wife, Mrs. Mead. There's another character named Mrs. Merriweather. She's another sort of organizer, sort of busybody, present in Atlanta. And then we have Ona Munson, who plays Belle Watling. Belle Watling is the town madam. She owns a brothel. She's looked down on a lot by the other women other than Melanie. Melanie is kind of the embodiment of like a good Christian spirit who doesn't judge her neighbors, she treats everyone as equal. She's kind to everybody exactly the same way, although she is a Klan sympathizer, so take that with what you will. But in the book, she's portrayed as like very sweet. She does not look down on the character of Belle Watling for being what she is, although all the other women have the regressive take on sex work. Rhett Butler is a frequenter at Belle Watling's establishment and is part owner in the brothel as well. They just describe it as friendship, but we know. Back to Tara. We have a few other characters. We have Hattie McDaniel, who plays Mammy. She is the sort of housekeeper of Tara, one of the slaves. We have Oscar Polk as Pork. He is sort of the main butler in the house. He's another slave. Then we have Butterfly McQueen, which is like such a cool name, as Prissy. Prissy is sort of viewed as this like very kind of bumbling, idiot, useless slave. And David O. Selznick, who's the producer of the film, had a lot of conversations with Butterfly McQueen. She talks about this, about how it was a very difficult character for her to play because she, this is such a reductive view on Black people and on slaves, and for her to be such an intelligent, creative person to be reduced to this role was hard for her. And she spoke up a lot about her treatment on the film in the moment, and she was actually criticized by Hattie McDaniel, saying like, you can't talk like this, like you're never going to work in Hollywood again if you keep speaking up for yourself. So I just thought that was really interesting, that there was like such kind of a fear about not working again if you were using your voice on this film. So Gone with the Wind starts with a title card, and it's got the very iconic Tara's theme song, and then you see Gone with the Wind kind of scrolling by, and then there's a quote. Here was the land of cavaliers and cotton fields called the Old South. Here in this pretty world, gallantry took its last bow. Here in the last ever to be seen of knights and their ladies, fair master of slave. Look only for it in books, for it is no more than a dream remembered. So right there, it tells you exactly what you need to know about the lens in which this film is set. This is very much a lost cause mentality film. So we get to the opening scene of the film, and Scarlett is sitting on the porch with the Charlton twins. Sorry, when I look down, I'm reading my own Google Docs notes. So if you ever wonder why I'm like this half the time, it's I'm reading my own notes. And they're discussing the war. She is not interested at all. She wants to discuss the barbecue that's happening next door. Her kind of opening line is war, war, war. That's all the talk at any party this spring. I get so bored I could scream. So she's not interested. Scarlett is very vain. She has a very kind of small understanding of the world. She's only in it for her own self-interest. Some of that changes through the book, but the self-interest never does. So they're discussing the barbecue at the Wilkes plantation, and the Charlton twins are trying to talk her into being their dates, and she's kind of toying with them. And because she's not interested, they're starting to discuss a little bit of town gossip to try and spike her interest. And they tell her that Ashley Wilkes is planning on proposing to Melanie. And Scarlett is devastated. The bit of backstory there is that Scarlett has been childhood best friends with Ashley, and over the course of their childhood has fallen in love with him. And they are like buddies. They go horseback riding together. They hang out. Their characters are very different. Scarlett is very down to earth, very headstrong, and Ashley is very much like an intellectual. His family vacations up north, but he's really into art and poetry and literature. And that is none of that interests Scarlett, but she's 16. And when you're 16, you don't understand that you need somebody who is like you and compatible. Her and Ashley are not compatible in any way. They have like zero things that would make a good marriage work. But she's in love with him, and she is devastated. And she knows that her father is next door at the Wilkes' spending time with John, who's the father. And so she decides to take off, leave the Charlton twins where they are, and go and meet where her father will be coming back. And you see Mammy screaming out of the top of the window that she needs a shawl to cover herself from the sun. The Mammy kind of like rules the roost there and is like the knower of all things. Mammy raised Ellen from the time she was a baby, and same with Scarlett, and then we'll go on to raise Scarlett's children. So Mammy takes a lot of personal responsibility. They're her girls. They're like her kids, essentially. So she meets Gerald at the fence. He's hopping the fence over his horse down at the end of the plantation. He's fallen off and gotten a lot of trouble from his wife. And so he does that down there because he loves the thrill. Anyway, Scarlett meets him, and she kind of asks him about it in kind of a roundabout way, not wanting to reveal her true feelings. But of course she does, because 16-year-olds are bad at being subtle. Gerald says to her that you need a southerner who thinks like you. Ashley Wilkes, you guys are too different. It would never work. I would give my permission for you to marry him, but it would be with my own kind of against what I want for you. And that he says, he's not going to ask you to marry him. He's already asked Melanie. They're going to announce it tomorrow. And then she kind of, is freaking out and doesn't want anything. And he says, the only thing that matters to you is Tara. The only thing that should matter to you is Tara. It's the only thing you can hold on to. And this is his quote. Do you tell me, Katie Scarlett, that Tara, that land doesn't mean anything to you? Why, land is the only thing in this world worth working for, worth fighting for, worth dying for, because it's the only thing that lasts. And he picks up some of the dirt and he presses it into her hand. And there's like a panoramic shot where they look out at Tara in silhouette. And she says, oh, Paul, you talk like an Irishman. And he says, it's proud that I am Irish. And don't you be forgetting, Missy, you're half Irish too. And to anyone with a drop of Irish blood in them, why, the land that they live on is like their mother. Oh, there, but you're now just a child. It'll come to you, this love of the land. There's no getting away from it if you're Irish. And this is sort of the central thing that grows within Scarlett throughout the film, is this connection to her land, connection to who she is as a person. Tara is the thing that grounds her in life. No matter what she does throughout the film, like this grip that Tara has on her spirit and her place of solace in the world. And so this is sort of like the seed that's planted that then grows into this big tree throughout her life. So we then cut to a scene where Ellen O'Hara gets home, and she's sort of like this nurse midwife, sort of goes in and takes care of the sick people and helps to deliver babies within the community. She's very engaged in her charity, and she comes home and she meets the overseer named Jonas Wilkerson at the door, and he's sort of done for the day, and he's trying to talk to her, and she says, "I've just come from Amy Slattery's bedside. Your child has been born and mercifully has died." And then she walks in the house. And in the book, it explains it more that Amy Slattery comes from this poor, they call it a cracker family or white trash. So they don't own any slaves and they work their own land, and they've got a million kids, and they've had this baby out of wedlock. And at this time in 1862, I believe, is the start of the film. This is like scandalous. And so she's had a stillbirth baby. And Ellen is very, 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 very Catholic. Her faith is very important to her. We see this later. Not in the film, but in the book, like one of her daughters, Corinne, ends up becoming a nun. Like their Catholic faith is like at the central part. So they even have this like more regressive take on it because they're not married. Anyway, so Ellen comes inside and everybody's got questions for her poor mammy, the girls, and they're having this argument about their dresses for the barbecue. Scarlett wants to wear this, and her sister Sue Ellen wants to wear this, and they're kind of arguing with her, and Scarlett's kind of pouting, and Ellen notices that she's quite sad. She doesn't know it's about Ashley, but her mother sort of offers her up her jewelry to wear for the barbecue tomorrow to try and cheer her up. So following, there's a scene where they're engaging in their prayer before bed. And Scarlett is like not paying attention at all. And she sort of hatches this plan that she's going to go to the barbecue, flirt with all the men, look like an absolute dime. And then she's going to tell Ashley how she feels. And if she tells Ashley how she feels, he must secretly feel that way for her, is how she thinks he feels. And he won't marry Melanie. So then we flip to the scene. It's the next day and they're getting ready for the barbecue. And Mammy's pulling on Scarlett's corset, trying to get her in. And in the book, they get her down to 18 inches, which is like crazy. And I'm so happy I don't live in the time of that. And I can just like wear sweatpants and like breathe. So Mammy is kind of going over the traditions and kind of the rules for women at the time with Scarlett and reminding her how to behave like a lady. There's a lot of talk and a lot of rhetoric throughout this film about what being a good woman means at the time, and that you need to be meek and quiet and follow your husband, follow the rules. You don't want to eat too much. You don't want to drink too much. You don't want to be too loud. Don't make your presence too known. You are a beautiful, quiet decoration, is essentially how they want women to be at this time period and in this particular location. And Scarlett says, "I don't want to do that. I want to eat at the barbecue. I want to have a good time. I want to hang up with the men. Like, I want to have a good time." And she says, "Ashley Wilkes tells me he likes to see a girl with a healthy appetite." And Mammy says, "I don't see Ashley Wilkes asking you to marry him." And Scarlett has this like iconic moment where she's trying to walk out the door without eating, and she turns back and just gives Mammy this like stank face. And Mammy does this like coy little like knowing like nod, and it's hilarious. Like Mammy is like like one of my favorite characters in the film. Like Mammy is such a strong voice and such a strong person, and I think the one of the very, very grounding characters, one of the very, very important characters to this family. Like Mammy keeps them together. Mammy keeps them in line. Like, anyways, so Scarlett throws her umbrella across the room that she was going to take out, and she wolfs down some food and then gets into the buggy and goes to 12 Oaks with her sisters and her father for this barbecue. So we get out of the carriage at 12 Oaks, and it's this great big beautiful plantation mansion, and there's all these women in these like elaborate Southern Belle hoop skirts costumes with just like this intricate lace and this intricate silks and designs and colors and these big bonnets. Like they are gorgeous, all these dresses. And Scarlett has decided like she is going to make her presence absolutely known, and she's flirting with every man there in the most over the top Southern charm, bless your heart way. And so she's flirting with the Charlton twins when she sees them, and she even starts flirting with Charles Hamilton, who I mentioned before is the cousin of Ashley Wilkes. And she's teasing him and wants to have barbecue with him, she says. And in the book, they did explain it more, but Charles is younger and very quiet and very shy, and he doesn't display any sort of stereotypical masculine characteristics. He's like I said, quiet and shy and meek and kind of wants to follow a stronger woman. And so he is enamored with Scarlett and just like nothing but cartoon, like heart eyes. If he was Bugs Bunny, his tongue would roll on the floor. And then she starts flirting with her sister's beau too, Sue Ellen. His name is Frank Kennedy. He's sort of an older man. And so she's doing this, and Ashley's sort of picking up on this because he sees her, and he sort of brings Melanie over, and Melanie is like genuinely very nice to Scarlett and is saying she wants to be more like her and wants to grow close now that she's going to be with Ashley. And Scarlett's kind of saying, oh, don't say things you don't mean. And Ashley said, no, like no one can ever, accuse Melanie of being insincere. And then Scarlett kind of goes up the stairs, and at the bottom of the stairs, she catches notice of the man staring at her. And one of her friends points out that is a man named Rhett Butler. And Rhett Butler sees all the way through Scarlett's bullshit and reads her for exactly what she is. It's explained that Rhett Butler is a character that isn't received. So he took a woman out for a buggy ride and spent all night with her and then refused to marry her. And so he isn't received by anyone, including his own family, but he's here as Ashley Wilkes' guest. We then flip to the barbecue, and Scarlett's got all these men all around her, and they're all wanting to be with her. And Charles Hamilton is trying to talk to her a little bit. And as she's talking to her, he confesses his love for her. And she's not paying attention because she can see Ashley and Melanie in the distance. We then flip to a scene where the girls are going to go take their naps, because women have to take naps for the day for some reason. And there's all of these poor slaves that are fanning these girls. They're sweating and they're wiping their hands off while they're having to continuously fan the plantation owner's daughters, which I just think is, it's not really mentioned, it's sort of almost glamorized, but it's this, to me, it was rewatching it, I was just like, it made me feel gross. Scarlett decides that she's going to sneak out and talk to Ashley. Now is her good time because she's not going to bump into any women. So she puts on her dress, she kind of like pinches her cheeks so that she looks like a little more rosy. And then she goes down the stairs and she hears the men talking in the other room, and they're discussing war. And so this is sort of the opening lines, and it's talking about, the Civil War is going to break out in Abraham Lincoln and the states, the Union versus the Confederacy, and how they're trying to, become their own sort of thing. And it actually starts off this thing. He says, well, gentlemen, if Georgia fights, I go with her. But like my father, I hope the Yankees leave the Union in peace. And someone says, Ashley, they've insulted us. And Charles Hamilton says, you can't mean you don't want war. And Ashley says, very poignant and very, very smart thing. Most of the miseries of the world were caused by wars, and when the wars were over, no one ever really knew what they were about. So then they ask Rhett Butler what he thinks, because Rhett Butler has been through New York, all through the North, has friends up there. He's also been going to Europe to run some of the goods to and from Europe, such as like lace, silk, some of the fancier things for the women, costumes, kind of things like that. And so they're asking what he thinks. And he says, I think it's hard to win a war with words, gentlemen. Charles says, what do you mean, sir? And Rhett Butler says, I mean, Mr. Hamilton, there's not a cannon factory in the whole South. And then they say, what difference does that make to a gentleman? Rhett Butler says, I'm afraid it's going to make a great deal of difference to a great many gentlemen, sir. Charles says, are you hinting, Mr. Butler, that the Yankees can lick us? And Rhett Butler says, no, I'm not hinting. I'm saying plainly that the Yankees are better equipped than we. They've got factories and shipyards, coal mines, and a fleet to bottle up our harbors and starve us to death. All we've got is cotton and slaves and arrogance. A man says, such treacherous. Charles says, I refuse to listen to any renegade talk. And then Rhett says, I'm sorry if the truth offends you. And Charles says, apologies aren't enough, sir. I heard you were turned out of West Point, Mr. Rhett, and that you aren't received by any decent family in Charleston, not even your own. Rhett says, I apologize again for all my shortcomings. Mr. Wilkes, perhaps you don't mind if I walk about your place. I seem to be spoiling everyone's brandy, cigars, and dreams of victory. And so Rhett leaves the room, and Ashley leaves the room to follow him. And this is where Scarlett kind of strikes. And she gets to the bottom of the stairs. She says, Ashley, come here. She pulls him into the library. And this is where she confesses her love for her. And he doesn't take it well. And he says, I love your spirit. I love who you are, but we are too different. We are not meant to be. We wouldn't be happy. I'm going to marry Melanie. And Scarlett freaks out and she says, like, you're scared to marry me. You're a coward. You'd rather be with this mealy mouse woman and just raise a bunch of brats who are just like her. And then she just says, I can't think of anything bad enough to call you. I'll hate you till I die. And she slaps him right across the face, and he is like stunned by this act of violence and holds his face and just walks away and walks out of the room. She picks up this kind of vase knickknack thing and she hucks it at the fireplace, and it kind of crashes and breaks. And then who pops up out of the sofa but Rhett Butler? And he says, "Woof, has the war started?" And she says, "You should have made your presence known." And he says, in the middle of that beautiful love scene, "Now, that wouldn't have been very tactful, would it?" And she says, "Oh, sir, you're no gentleman." And he says, "And you, miss, are no lady." Don't think I hold that against you. Ladies never held any appeal for me. And Scarlett's sort of stunned, but this is the sort of back and forth banter that they have throughout the film. Scarlett storms off, and as she's leaving the room, all this cheering is happening. You hear the rebel yell for the first time, "The war has been called." And she runs to try and find Ashley before he leaves, because he's going to be sort of the commanding officer of the troop from where they're at. And she sees him, and he's already gotten on horseback, and he is kissing Melanie goodbye, and she's sort of watching this out the window. And Charles Hamilton races to find her, and he asks, he said, I want to marry you. And she sort of isn't even really paying attention, and she says yes, because she just wants to make Ashley jealous. And so they cut to the next couple of days, and her and Charles get married. And this was a big thing that happened, is there was a bunch of weddings in the county, including Ashley and Melanie, so that they would all get married before they went off to the war. And then we flip to the next kind of scene, and it's a letter that Scarlett receives, and that she is now a widow, that Charles, before even the war kind of gets going or before he went to battle, he caught pneumonia and died. So she's then having to go into mourning. So this is a period after somebody's husband or family member dies where they have to wear kind of the classic all black. They weren't allowed to go out. They weren't allowed to have visitors. Like, they are only supposed to eat, sleep, and breathe their spouse's death. And she's 16. She wants to go out. She wants to go to parties. She wants to be, I mean, anybody, like, I think after somebody dies, like, wants the company of friends and friendship, and you don't want to sit in your grief constantly. I mean, you do want to feel it and go all the way through it. However, like, she's 16, like, she doesn't want to be alone. She also never loved Charles. There's a scene in the book where they talk about their wedding night and the first time she has sex, and it is like traumatizing for her. She bawls her eyes out. She's not okay. Like, she doesn't love this man. She never loved this man. It's her own fault she got into the marriage in the first place. Like, she didn't have to get married. However, there was so much societal pressure at this time that, like, they talk about this one character who's 20, like, she's an old maid and this, like, sad soul. So there's a lot of, like, societal pressure on top of that. So she's in her mourning period and she's crying, and Mammy sees right through this. She knows why Scarlett's crying, and she knows it's not because she misses Charles. But her mother doesn't understand that, and her mother sends her off to Atlanta to go see Pity Pat. And Mammy has another great line where she's like, "You're not sad. You want to go and you want to see Ashley. And when Ashley comes home on furlough, you're going to be waiting for him just like a spider." And the Mammy is like amazing comic relief in this film. Like, she's so smart and so shrewd. So then Scarlett gets to Atlanta, and she goes and she stays with Melanie, Charles's sister, and Pity Pat and Uncle Peter. And so she's volunteering at the hospital. That's sort of her role there with Melanie. They're nurses. And so Atlanta throws this big bazaar. It's this fundraiser for the hospital and for the cause. And it's this great big dance. And they're selling off stuff at auction. And it's pretty scandalous that Scarlett is there because she is in mourning. And Melanie's having to sort of defend her and say, look, like, she's here for the cause. She's not here to dance. And as Melanie's doing that, this is a great shot where it pans over to Scarlett, and she's standing at the counter, and it flips around behind her. And just as Melanie says, she's not here to dance, Scarlett's like listening to the music, and she appears like she's leaning on the counter, just kind of waiting for somebody to come up to the auction, but she's dancing underneath. Like, you can see her feet, like, as the other dancers are there. And so after one of the dances, they announce that Rhett Butler's there, and Rhett Butler has become this blockade runner. And so he's running goods from Europe through the Yankee ships and then into their harbors, and bringing stuff in for the people of Atlanta. And he's doing this in the book because he's paying off Yankees, because a lot of them are his friends. Rhett sort of double dips. He doesn't have a loyalty to the Confederacy. He's got one loyalty, he says, and that's to Rhett Butler. And so he's making ton of money. He's doing really well. He's kind of the only person really profiting out of this, and he's exploiting Belle Watling's another woman, because when the men come home on furlough, they're wanting some fun, and so they're going to the brothel. So Rhett Butler is there, and he clocks Scarlett immediately, and he comes over to talk to her and to kind of tease her. And then he greets Melanie, and he quite likes Melanie. He has a lot of respect for her because she's such a kind person, and she remembers him from the party too. Um, and then Dr. Mead, who I mentioned earlier, comes over and he says, Melanie, I need your permission to do this because it's kind of shocking. And Melanie is sort of the moral barometer of the town of Atlanta. If anybody's ever unsure about whether or not something's okay, they run it past Melanie. And so then it's announced, they go up and they say, okay, for the next dance, if you want to head the reel, which is the dance they're doing, the Virginia reel, you must bid for the woman you want to dance with, and whoever is the highest bid gets the gets to lead the reel. And so all the bids start up. They're like $5, $10, and Rhett kind of starts up and he says $150 in gold. Because of course this time gold is much more valuable. The Confederate dollar is plummeting because it's not good anywhere but within the Confederacy. So he says 150 in gold, and they ask him for who, and he says Mrs. Charles Hamilton. And they say, no, like, she's in mourning, you need to pick somebody else. And he says, no, only Mrs. Charles Hamilton. And Dr. Mead says she won't even consider it. And Scarlett screams across the room, oh yes I will, because that's all Scarlett wants to do. She wants to dance, she wants to feel young. And so she leads the dance, and this is absolutely scandalous to the people of Atlanta. They think that she doesn't show respect for Charles in this sort of move that she's making, and her and Rhett are dancing, and he is very clearly fallen in love with her, and he says it to her. He's like, one day I want to hear you say the words you heard to Ashley Wilkes, I love you. And she says, you'll never hear those words from me, Rhett Butler, as long as you live. And so they sort of dance and dance. And so following this, Rhett begins to bring her presents quite regularly. He brings her this bonnet from Europe and the sort of the latest fashion. She doesn't know how to wear it anymore because nothing's being trickled in. They're just recycling their old dresses and stuff. And he thinks it's a shame that a girl like her isn't knowing the latest fashions. And then I'll read some of the dialogue because I think it's important to read out the way Rhett and Scarlett talk to each other because they really bounce off each other. And he says, and those panelettes, I don't know a woman in Paris who wears panelettes. Oh, Rhett, what do they, you shouldn't talk about such things. And he says, you little hypocrite, you don't mind me knowing about them, just me talking about them. She says, but really, Rhett, I can't go on accepting these gifts, although you are awfully kind. And Rhett says, I'm not kind, I'm just tempting you. And she says, well, if you think I'll marry you for a bonnet, I won't. And he said, don't flatter yourself, I'm not a marrying man. And she says, I won't kiss you for it either. And she sort of walks up to him and gets really close. And he says, open your eyes and look at me. No, I don't think I will kiss you, although you need kissing badly. That's what's wrong with you. You need to be kissed often and by someone who knows how. And she says, oh, I think you suppose you're the proper person. He said, I might be, if the right moment ever came. And she says, you're a conceited, black-hearted varmint, Rhett Butler, and I don't know why I let you come see me. And Rhett says, I'll tell you why, Scarlett, because I'm the only man over 16 and under 60 who's around to show you a good time. So this is sort of their, like, sort of pithy back and forth banter, which is I think, what they like from each other. It's almost this, like, pull and pull of, like, meanness, this friendship. They really understand each other, and he sees Scarlett for who she is to her core, and he still loves her. Like, she is equally as conceited and self-absorbed as he is. Ashley then is granted 3 days of furlough, is what they call it, so he gets to come home from the war for 3 days. And Melanie and Scarlett are both very, very excited. Melanie's made him this beautiful jacket, and Scarlett's made him this scarf. Ashley is sort of underplaying the horrors of the war to Melanie. You know, at the end of his visit, when he's going to leave, he explains to Scarlett what's really happening in the war, and that his men don't have boots. The snow in Virginia is deep, and all the Yankees keep coming more and more and more and more. And he's telling her they're going to lose the war. And he makes her promise to him that she'll take care of Melanie, that she won't let her suffer because Melanie's not strong like she is. And Scarlett confesses her love for Ashley, and she kisses him, and he kind of pushes her away and leaves. We then see the notice of the Battle of Gettysburg, and we get a scene of them. They're in the town center, and they're waiting for the death reports. And so there's these big scrolls with all the names of all the people that have died, like killed in action or missing in action, or any of the things injured, captured. And Ashley's not on the list, but the Charlton twins and the Meade son and a number of people from the county that they know have all died. And so it's this very sad scene where they're crying, and Rhett comes up to Scarlett and they talk about how it's a waste, and she explains all the death and that has happened. We then cut to some scenes at the hospital where Scarlett and Melanie are nursing, and Scarlett hates her work and she's getting nothing from it, and Melanie's sort of treating the men and saying, I treat every one of them like they're Ashley, because I hope that if Ashley's in this situation, somebody will care for him the way I care for these men. And following one of their nights of volunteering, Belle Watling, the town Magnum, pulls up, and she's wanting to donate to the hospital. And all the women are trying to get her out of there, but Melanie talks to her in a kind way and accepts her donation and thanks her for being kind. And she hands her money and gold. And when they open up the little handkerchief she's given, and they realize it's Rhett Butler's. And Scarlett is scandalized, but she wants to know. There's this kind of mix of almost jealousy about Belle, even though Scarlett has said explicitly she doesn't have any interest in Rhett, but she still wants his attention solely. And that's sort of the way Scarlett is like she wants attention from all the men, but she's only going to give it to Ashley. It's then revealed that Melanie is pregnant. And she isn't doing well, so Scarlett's having to take up more and more of the work at the hospital. And there's a scene where there's a bunch of men that are injured and wounded, and they're got lice and they've got gangrene. And one of the men there is Frank, who's asking about Sue Ellen, and she says that she got typhoid, but she's doing okay. And they're chatting a little bit, and then we see a scene of a doctor, and he walks by and he said, "Your leg has gangrene," to one of the soldiers. "It's got to come off." And they don't have chloroform, and they don't have painkiller. They have no morphine. They've got nothing. He's going to have an amputation with no painkillers, no anesthetic. And Scarlett's told, you have to come in. You're a nurse. You have to help with this. And I like the scene makes me sob because he's screaming, "Don't cut, don't cut, don't cut." And they're doing the surgery. And this is a real thing that happened to the soldiers. And I think sometimes when we think about good versus evil and the bad side and the Confederacy and the Yankees and what we're fighting for, I think sometimes we forget that horrors of the war are suffered by the soldiers. No matter what side. Often, it's the political leaders. They're starting the wars, and then the lowest level of civilians are having to fight it out or having to suffer. The politicians are safe in their little glorified castles behind walls, but the soldiers are the ones that's suffering. They don't have any chloroform. They're getting amputated without anesthetic. Like it's just horrible. And these politicians are sending men off to die for the cause. What cause? And so that's a hard scene for me to watch. And Scarlett looks and she's like, "I can't do this anymore." And she leaves. And at this point, people are trying to flee Atlanta. She runs into some of the field slaves that are going to dig trenches for the men. Big Sam is one of them. She greets them kind of like their family. She's so happy to see people from home, and she's asking about her mother. And they say, "We've been out and we've been digging these trenches. We don't know what's happening at Tara." And she gets home, and Aunt Pitty Pat's packing up and leaving, and she's saying, "Oh, are you coming with me?" And they can't move Melanie. Melanie's on bed rest. She's really not doing well with her pregnancy. And Scarlett has a discussion with Dr. Meade saying, like, "Melanie's going to deliver the baby soon. Like, you need to help me." And he says, "I can't help you. Like, there's men dying. Like, you need to figure it out." And Prissy kind of steps in, and she says, Prissy is one of the slaves that had been in Atlanta with her. I forgot to mention, she kind of doesn't really start being a more central character until this point in the film. And she says, "I know how to deliver babies. My mom was a midwife. Like, I can do this." And so Scarlett's sort of relieved. And then as the people have sort of fled and they're left alone more in the town, and the Confederate army is starting to light off the ammunition and burn what they have, because the Yankees are doing the march to the sea. They're going to come through and they're going to tear through Atlanta, and they don't want them to get their ammunition, so the army's retreating. This is when Melanie goes into labor, and Scarlett's terrified. She doesn't know what to do, and then Prissy sort of confesses that she doesn't know what to do either. She just said that for whatever reason. And Scarlett slaps her, which is, again, like a horrible thing to watch. And Scarlett runs out to get Dr. Meade. And there's a big shot that was shot on a crane where they had to go, I think, 80 stories up, of all the wounded soldiers that Scarlett has to walk through on the way to find Dr. Meade. And she begs him, and he says, "Are you kidding me? Like, there's men dying around my eyes. Like, I can't leave to deliver a baby. So Scarlett and Prissy have to deliver the baby, and they do. But Melanie loses a lot of blood. She almost dies. And then as night falls, Scarlett decides, I have to go back to Tara. I can't be here. I can't be here when the Yankees come. It's not safe. And so she sends Prissy out to get Rhett. And Rhett is at Belle Watling's. And so Belle Watling and the other sex workers and Rhett's friends are all celebrating up at her brothel. And Prissy says, you have to help us. And so Rhett steals a horse and he comes and he saves them and he picks up Melanie, picks up the baby, carries them out, and they decide they're going to escape and they're going to go to Tara. And he says, are you crazy? Like, you have to go back through where the Yankees are marching through there. They've been fighting there all day and they're coming through. You have to go through Yankee lines. And Scarlett says, I don't care. I'm going home to my mother. And so they go through the burning of Atlanta and the city's crashing down around them. And there's looters and they're trying to get the horse, and Red is sort of navigating that. And they get to sort of a road where the soldiers are retreating and they're walking alongside them, and you're seeing soldiers drop of exhaustion and die, and other soldiers are dragging their bodies or throwing their dead bodies on their shoulders. Scarlett just says, I wish they'd hurry up. And Rhett says, I wouldn't be in such a hurry to see them go if I were you. With them goes the last semblance of law and order. So this is again more lost cause rhetoric. So they get to the crossroads of the county where Scarlett's from and where Tara is. And Rhett says, I'm going to leave you. Here's the gun. Here's the horse. If anybody tries to steal the horse, shoot them, but don't shoot the horse. And Scarlett is devastated. She's like, what do you mean? Like, you said you'd never fight in the war. And he says, I've always had a weakness for a lost cause once it's really lost. And she's so angry at him. And he says, I'm not asking for you to forgive me. I'll never understand or forgive myself. And if a bullet gets me, so help me, I'll laugh at myself for being an idiot. And there's one thing I do know. That is that I love you, Scarlett. In spite of you and me and this whole silly world going to pieces around us, I love you. Because we're alike. Bad lots, both of us. Selfish and shrewd, being able to look at things in the eyes and call them by their right names. And he kisses Scarlett and she slaps him hard, and then she tells him that she hopes a landfill lands right on him and blows him to a million pieces. And he kind of laughs and says goodbye. And Scarlett drives the buggy, and there's a scene where the Yankee soldiers are marching above her and she goes under a bridge and she's got the horse in the carriage in a creek and she's trying to hold the horse's mouth shut as it's neighing because she can't reveal the secret, and it's pouring rain and Melanie's got a blanket over her and the baby's starting to cry, and they're trying to muffle the sound because if the Yankees find them, they're going to die. They're going to be shot. They're going to have bayonets ran through them. And this is discussed a lot more heavily in the book. It's sort of just implied in the film. And so finally they're out of there. They get past the enemy line and they get to 12 Oaks, and it's been burned down, and they find that John Wilkes is dead and he sees his grave. Melanie is sort of able to muster up enough energy to look over to see the grave, only to pass out again. And Scarlett finds a cow there, and she ties it to the horse to bring back to Tara. And as they're just getting to Tara, the horse dies of starvation. And they get there, and Melanie's brought inside and the baby's brought inside to help. And it's revealed that the sisters are still very sick with typhoid, and all the other slaves have run off, and that the Yankees were fighting and using this as a headquarters, and they burned all the cotton, they burned all the goods, they burned everything. And Gerald has gone insane. He doesn't remember anything. He's got, I don't know, it's sort of implied that he has a bit of dementia, but he's sort of gone mad with grief, is how it's described in the book. And Scarlett's frantically looking for her mother, and Mammy reveals Ellen's dead. And they go in and they see Ellen's dead body. In the book, it's revealed she died that morning. And Scarlett gets there really late into the night, and Scarlett is just screaming in grief, and it's another scene to watch that's like quite hard. Just because I think you think about your own parents and how you're going to feel when that happens. And Scarlett tries to go out, and there's no food anywhere, and she's hungry, and she knows Melanie's starving and needs to breastfeed, and so she goes out looking for food, and she finds one carrot in the dirt and eats it and vomits because she hasn't had food in so long. And she is laying in the dirt. The scene is like so powerful. She's laying in the dirt. She grabs a handful of dirt. She holds it up, and she decides that life isn't gonna get her. Sorry, the scene makes me cry every time. I think it's moments like this that, like, when I think about Gone with the Wind, is what holds me to it, because I think if you've ever been through things that are really hard in your life and you've had moments of depression and grief, and then you decide, I'm not gonna let this win. I'm gonna fight. And then Scarlett holds it up and she says, as God is my witness, they're not going to lick me. I'm gonna live through this, and when it's all over, I'll never be hungry again. No, nor any of my folk. If I have to lie, cheat, steal, or kill, God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again. And this is where the intermission lasts. Yeah, and that's for me, that like part of Gone with the Wind that I hold so close to my heart, is this female character saying, I don't care. I'm gonna be okay. What happens to me? Whatever happens, I've got it. So I'm going to end on some tears. Yeah, that's where I'm going to leave you for today, intermission. And then next week, we're going to go over part 2. I hope everybody has a very happy Thursday.